finish their closing statements at the end. And I think then we'll be able to keep the rest of the time focused upon the issues and get as much out as we can during this period. I'm going to be asking questions that in many cases, in most cases, have been submitted by our readers, either through the internet, by email, by fax, by mail, and I had a couple of questions handed to me tonight already. We are also, you may have seen when you came in the lobby, making a little form available for people to ask questions when they come here tonight. And I want to just caution you, we're going to go for about an hour. This is going to be 2 hours of debate. We'll go for about an hour and we will take a break. It will also allow the people with cameras to change this thing. They've all told me they need to stop at about an hour, and we'll try to do that. But what I want to say is that we'll take that break for about 10 or 15 minutes. So if you want to write down a question and get it to us before the second half of the program, you need to do that before that break. So if you could get up if you want to go out and get a form now quietly, or if you've already got a form, please be sure you submit that when the break occurs so that I have a chance to look at those questions as well, because I want to ask questions of people who haven't had a chance to submit them thus far. The format is basically what you see in most of these debates. Each candidate will have an opportunity to answer each of the questions that are asked. They'll all be on a clock here, and we're going to be fairly strict about that. We've got the bright lights of Calaveras here in front of us. This is a machine that was created by one of our local residents for just this purpose. And so the yellow will tell them that they've got 30 seconds left of their time, and the red will tell them they're out of time. And both candidates have felt that it was important to have time limitations and to keep those time limitations strict so that it's really an equal opportunity for both candidates. I've also told them that if you have a quick answer to a question that's only going to take 10 seconds and you want to use the rest of your 2 minutes talking about something else, feel free to do that. Because we're here to hear from you and hear what you have to say and what you think is important. But please answer the question first, and please answer the question. So I will add that at the outset. We'll start by giving each of the candidates 3 minutes to give an opening statement, to introduce themselves to the extent they haven't already, to say what they think they need to say about their candidacy and about the issues in an opening statement, and then we'll proceed to questions after that. So each of them will have 3 minutes for that at the outset. And we had a little bit of a bargaining session beforehand, and we decided that Mr. Durston would begin with his opening statement. So that's where we'll begin, but in just a moment. One other thing I wanted to say is that this debate is being taped by a number of different cameras and individuals, and I can only really speak for the Calaveras Enterprise. We have someone taping this, and we will make that tape available on our website, or possibly make DVDs available to people if there's enough of an interest in it. And so all I can say is look at CalaverasEnterprise.com after this debate, and we will either have it up for you to watch, or we will tell you how you can get a copy on a DVD. We've got to figure out what's the best way to do that. And there will be other people who probably can make it available to you as well.
Can you put it on public access TV?
I believe it's going to be on public access TV. I know they are here doing the taping tonight for that purpose. I think, well, one other thing I should say too, in terms of the questions, when we've asked people to submit questions in advance, we have asked them to include their name and the town or rural area where they live. Because we felt that it's important for people to take responsibility for their questions, and that it's something that the audience might want to know where your questions are coming from. Most people have done that. So I will, to the extent that I have the ability to do that, be able to tell you who asked to pose that question. But there are some of the questions areas where there's a series of people who've made contributions on a general subject, and I'm going to try to synthesize some of those so that I can just cut to the quick of a particular area and ask a question in that area. So it'll be from a number of different people who've expressed an interest in that area. I want to say as well, I've had the opportunity to conduct videotape interviews with each of these candidates during this election year. And I certainly appreciate their willingness to come up here to Calaveras and sit down in front of our cameras at the Calaveras Enterprise and go through that exercise. I enjoyed it immensely with both of them. It was a fascinating conversation that we had in both cases. And we had made that available on the Calaveras Enterprise website. And there again, it's now off the website because it's been some time in both cases. But if people have an interest enough between now and the election to go back and look at those interviews, please send us an email. Let us know. If we get enough interest, we will either put them back up on the website and make them available to people, or we will find a way to get a DVD available so that people can get that if you want to see. We can put both of the interviews on a single DVD fairly easily. Finally, I'm going to turn off my cell phone. And I hope everybody else in the audience will do the same before we begin. And with that, we are ready to begin. So we'll begin with Bill Durston and his opening statement.
Thank you, Ralph. Thanks very much. I'd like to thank Ralph and Buzz Eggleston, also of the Calaveras Enterprise, for setting up the debate. I'd like to thank the folks here at Bret Harte High School for hosting it, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I am Bill Durston. I was born and raised in the Santa Clara Valley before it became the Silicon Valley, along with my brother Tom here, who's in the second row. When I graduated from high school, which was the height of the Vietnam War, I volunteered for the United States Marines, and I served in combat in Vietnam. When I got out of the Marines, when I got back from Vietnam, I decided if I got back alive, I was going to marry my high school sweetheart, Diane, and Diane is also here in the front row. I became a physician. I went to medical school at UC San Francisco. First did a residency in internal medicine, and then went on to do a residency in emergency medicine. And I've been practicing in the Sacramento area now for about 26 years as an emergency doctor. I'm running for Congress because people asked me to run for Congress, both in 2006 and again in 2008, because Diane and I are very concerned about the future of our children and about the direction in which our country is headed. And quite frankly, because we, like many other citizens in our district, were dissatisfied with the job that the incumbent, Representative Dan Lundgren, my opponent in tonight's debate, was doing. In just 2 hours, obviously, we're not going to be able to discuss every important issue. But I believe that there is one overriding issue in this campaign on which my opponent does not deserve re-election, and that is the issue of trust. And I'll give you one example right now. In Sacramento County, I'm not sure if it was mailed out in Calaveras County as well, a mailer was sent out by my opponent accusing me of not supporting our troops. I'll read just one statement from the mailer. It says, Durston says he will not vote to spend 1 cent on our soldiers in Iraq unless the United States agrees to immediately pull out. No supplies, no equipment, not 1 cent. Bill Durston, official campaign website. That statement is a gross distortion of anything that has ever been on my campaign website or anything that I've ever said. As I mentioned, I volunteered for the Marines at the height of the Vietnam War, was decorated for courage in combat. I have always supported our troops, providing them with all the equipment they need, and providing our veterans with the services they need when they return. My opponent did not serve in the military. While I was fighting in Vietnam, he was serving as chair of youth for Nixon, sitting out the Vietnam War with a medical deferment. He has never publicly documented why he got the medical deferment. As far as voting goes, he gets a 0% rating from Disabled Veterans of America. He's gotten a D rating from Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. So I'll ask you to consider throughout this debate which candidate it is that deserves your trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And I should say, what if you haven't figured it out already, the timing is that Joel Metzger, who's one of our reporters there, is going to turn on the yellow light 30 seconds before the end of the time limit, and then the red light at the time limit. So we've got that straight. Dan?
All right, thanks very much, Ralph. I want to thank you. I want to thank others at the Calaveras News Enterprise for sponsoring this. I think it is worthwhile. I want to thank those who are here from the school that have allowed us to utilize their facilities and have been here to make sure that the facilities are open. I'd like to thank everybody who was out there. I'd like to thank my opponent for being here as well. I first went to Congress because I believe we needed some changes back in Washington, D.C. I believe we needed to have smaller government. I believe we needed to have lower taxes. We needed to have increased emphasis on our national defense. I believe that we needed a sense of purpose back there, a sense of fiscal discipline. 2 years after I was first elected, Ronald Reagan came back as elected President of the United States. He joined those of us who had started that effort, and together we did restore our military. Together we did continue the fight against the communism throughout the world. Together we did attempt to try and limit government. Together we did lower taxes across the board. I served for 10 years in the Congress, and then I returned to California, moving up to Northern California. I was elected Attorney General. I believed that the greatest responsibility we have in government is to provide a modicum of security for the people that we serve, so that they might be able to live their lives without fear in their own homes, their own businesses, or walking on the streets. It didn't seem to me to be right that senior citizens were living behind barred windows when the bad guys were out on the street. So I helped bring about a renaissance of the criminal justice system in California, and we had the overall crime rate dropped 35% during my tenure, and the homicide rate dropped by 50%. I left that job and was in the private sector for some time, and then 9/11 occurred, and I thought, what could I do to try and respond to that in any way? And I thought returning to public service might be of some benefit. So that's what I did. The same principles I had when I worked with Ronald Reagan guide me today. Limited government, lower taxes, strong national defense. We now have to have a strong effort in terms of homeland security. Different challenge today than it was back in the 80s, but nonetheless just as serious. An idea that we ought to allow people to be the best that they can be with the littlest interference by government. And the idea that most of the jobs are created in the private sector, and an economy that is charged by the dynamism of the average person is an economy that's going to create more jobs, not the government. I would entertain your consideration for a return to Congress, because the principles that have always guided me continue to guide me, and they will be the principles I follow in the next 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start tonight with a subject that I think too often gets left at the end rather than the beginning, and that's education. I have a question from Eve Bowers. Unfortunately, I don't have an address for her. And the question is this. She says, I have 3 young children and have seen firsthand how their education has changed due to the federal No Child Left Behind Act. I'd really like to hear the candidates discuss the act. In particular, I'd like to know whether they think it is helping children, and if not, what they would like to do about it. So I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to talk about that that issue framed by that question. The No Child Left Behind Act is probably the best known piece of federal legislation on the educational issue for some time, but you can expand that to talk about other ways in which the federal government might do good things to help education. So having started first with Bill on the opening statement, we'll give Dan a chance to start with that question.
Thanks very much. I happen to think that there is something to be said for national standards, but not national curricula. I still think that we ought to have local people controlling the schools in which their children attend and which serve their communities. At the same time, there has been, in some cases, a shirking of responsibility when you don't really set standards that your children are required to meet. And if you don't set standards, they're not going to meet them. I have every belief that the young people in America can be every bit as good as prior generations, and even more, they can compete in this world marketplace, and they're going to have to. We certainly have to do a better job with respect to our educational system in the areas of math, in the areas of science, in the areas of technology. And the interesting thing is, while we don't do as well in junior high and high in those areas, we are the outstanding country in the world with respect to higher education. That's why they want to come here, everybody around the world, for our higher education. But I would say this, in places like Calaveras County, Amador County, Alpine County, they suffer from the standpoint of the federal government deciding that on federal lands you can no longer operate some economic activity. It used to be that the local governments shared 25% of the royalties that were obtained by the federal government from economic activity on the federal lands. Alpine County, a county nearby here, 96% owned by the federal government. And when the federal government made a decision that they would diminish economic activity, it meant that those communities did not get the same tax base or tax return that they had before. That's why I worked so hard for the Secure Rural Schools Act. I worked hard for it over the last number of years. Some people have complained about the vote I made on the rescue bill, the rescue package, saying that it was filled with pork coming from the Senate. Great. Guess what the largest piece of pork was? It was the Secure Rural Schools Act, where the federal government finally lives up to its call to help those schools that otherwise would be diminished by the failure of a tax base in those areas.
Thank you. Bill? 2 minutes.
Well, there's a rule in medicine that's first, do no harm. If you've got a patient that's got a serious problem, you want to help them, but first thing you want to do is not make the situation worse. I think that the No Child Left Behind Act violates the first do no harm rule in the field of education. I believe that good public education is the cornerstone for a functioning democracy. But I think, as anybody who's a teacher knows, the No Child Left Behind Act has an overemphasis on cramming facts into kids' heads in the areas particularly of math and English at the expense of other subjects which are being severely curtailed, including other sciences, social studies, history, arts, music, that type of thing. The kids are being tested to death, literally. And I think that the No Child Left Behind Act tends to quash their lifelong love of learning. It doesn't lead to well-rounded students. And also, it's unfair to the teachers. The teachers are graded strictly on how well their students do on the standardized tests. Well, obviously, kids who are coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, kids who speak other languages rather than English as their native language, aren't going to do as well as on these standardized tests. So the teachers may be doing an outstanding job, but their students are scoring as high on the tests. And finally, the No Child Left Behind Act is an example of one of these unfunded mandates. The federal government says you have to meet these standards, but then doesn't give the funding to help them meet the standards. Well, I'll use my last few seconds to go back to the fact that crime and homicide dropped while my opponent was Attorney General. Crime and homicide dropped nationwide. Those were the years of relative peace and prosperity, during most of which time President Clinton was president in the United States.
Thank you. Another subject on which there's a strong disagreement about the role of federal government is health care. And there have been a number of questions on this. I'm going to try to synthesize those questions and to put it into a format that each of these candidates can talk about. by saying this. There are very different healthcare proposals that have been put forward by each of the presidential candidates. Obviously, whoever wins is going to have a chance to pursue that proposal in the Congress, and the Congress is going to have to deal with that. So I think the way that I'd like to phrase this question is, what in the proposals that have been put forward by the two candidates do you agree with or disagree with? And what do you think is the better system, or if there is a better system than either of them has proposed? And I think we're ready for Bill. You're first on this one.
As a general overall overview on the subject, the United States is the only Western industrialized country in the world that doesn't have some form of universal health care for everybody in the country. On ranking of quality of care in the top 25 industrialized countries of the world, because so many people are uninsured or underinsured in our country, we're 15th out of 25. And people say, well, it'd be nice if we had universal health care, but how are we going to pay for it? The fact is we're already paying for it. We pay twice as much on average per person as those other industrialized countries that have universal health care, that have higher quality of health care. I think rather than going into specific Obama and McCain proposals, I'm just going to talk about a couple more general principles. The problem, I think the biggest problem in our healthcare system, which is a problem in our entire democracy, is that we have government more of, by, and for special interests than of, by, and for the people. And my opponent, Republican career politician, represents that problem. If you look at his big contributors, you'll find that he gets big contributions from the for-profit health insurance companies who are making a fortune by avoiding insuring people who are sick or likely to become sick. He gets big contributions from the pharmaceutical companies who are also making a fortune. My opponent has voted against extending the state children's health insurance program for children with low-income families. He's voted against negotiating lower prescription drug costs for Medicare recipients. That makes no sense in government of, by, and for the people. It makes all kinds of sense in government of, by, and for special interests. I'll work for universal access to affordable health care for everybody in our country.
Okay, Bill?
No, I'm